welcome to Andalusia Knits. I'm Jordan, and this is my YouTube channel where I talk about all things knitting and fiber. And today I have the need for speed. I am going to be doing a couple chunky knit beanies and timing myself to see how long it takes me to knit them. And now granted, I am filming this introduction as the last part of this video, so I already know exactly how long it's going to take me to knit these beanies. But as for you, place your bets below in the comments how long you think it's going to take me to whip out a couple chunky, bulky weight beanies. And I'm doing this mostly because I have never done anything like this before. I keep track of my projects mostly through Ravelry. And while, I keep track of like the dates that I start a project and the date that I finish a project, I'm obviously not knitting 24/7 in between those two dates. So I don't ever really, I have got a good idea of like, oh, it takes me, 2 weeks to knit a pair of socks or 2 months to knit a sweater, but I don't know in terms of like hours and minutes and seconds. I don't know if I'm going to be getting into seconds, but I don't know more specifically than like a time span of days or weeks, how fast it takes me to knit something. And that is, I don't think that I'm going to be like, I don't think I'm the fastest knitter out there, but like knowing what my actual knitting speed is very useful information, at least to me, and it might be to you. So that is why I'm starting this journey, and I'm going to see how long it takes me to knit a hat. And if you enjoy knitting content like this, I would highly suggest you subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss any uploads from me. But with that, I am going to get to it, and I'm going to start talking about the pattern I'm going to use, and let's get to knitting these hats. So this morning, while I am working on my first hat, I'm going to watch a movie. And this is a movie from my childhood that I haven't thought about in a long time, but my television recently recommended it to me, and it all came flooding back to me. And that movie is Slam Dunk Ernest. And I don't know if anyone remembers, there was an entire series of movies in the 90s and maybe early or the late 80s as well, where Jim Varney, who was an actor, played this character named Ernest, who was kind of just like this bumbling, lovable, like slapstick idiot. And those movies were so funny to me. I thought that was just the pinnacle and the height of comedy. And as an adult, I would say that there are still some movies in that series that are actually really funny, like Ernest Scared Stupid and Ernest Goes to Camp. But Slam Dunk Ernest is not one of those movies. It was one of the later entries where by this point they had stopped releasing them in theaters, and it was just like direct-to-video slop. And this is one where Ernest gets a magical pair of basketball shoes from Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who plays an angel, and he's able to be like this amazing basketball star with his magical basketball shoes. And even as a kid, I remember this one being just like, this is just hot garbage. So I'm super pumped and excited to relive that today as I knit this hat. Alright, well, I just finished up Slam Dunk Ernest and made a little progress on the hat. And I have to say, that movie is not at all like I remembered as a kid. Like, it's not a great movie, but maybe I crapped on it a little too hard at the beginning of this. There's a weird, like, spiritual warfare subplot, like Christ in the desert. Ernest is tempted by the devil at one point. It was really, it was a really bizarre movie. I had really blocked out a lot of the major plot points of that movie, and they are really weird. But anyways, so I've made some progress on the hat so far. That took about like, an hour and 45 minutes, I think, is how long I've been going so far. And I've made some decent progress. This looks to be about like 5 or 6 inches. I don't have my measuring tape with me on hand, but I will give that a measure pretty soon. And, at this rate, like for an hour and 45 minutes, that wasn't too terribly bad. And I think that like another like one of those sessions, maybe in a little bit more, I should have this hat finished. But I'll keep you updated as I continue the hat. Okay, now it is later in the day and I officially have the beanie complete. And I'm going to hold off on saying exactly how long it took me to knit this because I'm going to talk about that a little bit later in the video. But I will say that I was pleasantly surprised at just how quickly I was able to get this done. And mostly that has to do with the fact that this is a 1x1 ribbed beanie. This is Passionate Kelsey's Chunky Knit beanie pattern, and I've used it quite a few times in the last few months doing experiments like this. It's a great pattern for that. But the one thing that I don't like about it is that it's a 1x1 rib, and I am an English style knitter. And so for those of you who don't know, English style knitters, we knit with the yarn in our right hand. And ribbing is the most annoying, time-consuming thing that a knitting pattern can ask us to do. And so what I want to do now that I have this first one complete is I want to knit a second beanie, hopefully tomorrow or in the next couple days, that still has some 1x1 ribbing for the folded brim portion of the hat. But then after the folded brim, I want to transition into just plain stockinette, because I think that like doing most of the body in stockinette is really going to cut down on the amount of time that it takes for me to knit this thing. And I'm going to have to do a little bit of thinking. Like, I'm not going to do anything crazy design-wise in terms of this second hat, but I need to think about what I'm going to do in terms of the decreases. I'm not entirely sure if these 1x1 rib decreases that are in the original pattern will work in the stockinette, but I'm going to figure that out, and I'm going to start knitting on my second hat, and I will see you when I start to cast that one on. Alrighty, it's time for day 2 of the speed runs. And today, like I mentioned, I'm going to do a modified version of the hat that I knit yesterday. This time I'm going to do enough ribbing to be able to flip the brim, and then once I have that ribbing done, I'm going to start doing stockinette and see if that will speed up the process any. And I'm not sure if I talked about the yarn that I've been using for these yet. This is just like basic acrylic yarn. This is I Love This yarn from Hobby Lobby. And yesterday I did the hat in a colorway Instant Classic, and today it's going to be Oasis Beat. And I have to say I'm pleasantly surprised with this yarn. When I bought it, for whatever reason, it felt very sort of like home goods to me. It looked and felt that way, but after knitting up that first hat, I've been very pleasantly surprised at how nice the yarn actually feels to wear, so I'm excited about knitting this hat too. And oh, and today, the movie of the day is going to be Ernest Goes to School. And this is another one of the Ernest movies. This is another one of those that was direct-to-video. And I don't have a lot of distinct memories about it. I know I watched it as a kid, but I don't remember a lot about it. And it's probably, once again, I'm going to go ahead and bet that I don't remember a lot about it because it's bad. So let's get knitting, let's get watching, and we'll see how fast I can whip out this second hat. Alrighty, it is now a new day, and it is bright and early. And while I'm only about 50% awake at this point, I would say I 100% have the second hat complete. And this one turned out okay. It didn't turn out quite as good as the other one. And while it wears just fine, like once you put it on, there's nothing wrong with it at all. I was a little interested to see that the rapid decreases at the top kind of make things a bit like scrunchier up there than they did for the ribbing hat. And like I said, it's not a big deal because that all stretches out once your head goes in it. But yeah, I wasn't expecting that. I've done a lot of hats in my time, stockinette, but I guess this is the first time that I've ever done like rapid decreases for the crown shaping. Like there's only four decrease rounds total at the top of this thing. And I think that even just something as simple as like putting a plain round in between each of those decreases would probably make this problem go away a little bit. But like I said, it's done at this point. This was more an experiment of like how fast I can knit the hat versus like how perfectly I can knit the hat. So that's good to know for like the future. But like I said, this will be just fine because this stretches out and looks great once it's actually on your head. And other than that, like I'll go into how long it took me to make this in just a moment when I talk about the speeds for both of the hats. But I was pleased with this one. I like the color scheme. I would say that, excuse me, ooh, real rough this morning. I'd say that green is probably my favorite color, but blue is a close second. So like anything in shades of blue, I'm gonna be just fine with. So that is the second hat. Now, I don't have a ton to say about its construction or anything other than the crown shaping. So let's go ahead and now move on to talking about both hats and how long it took me to knit them and the things that I learned during this process. All right, it is time to talk results. I am ready to tell you how long it took me to knit these hats. So, hat number one, the all-rib beanie. This was the first one I knit, if you remember, and it took me a total of 3 hours and 40 minutes to finish this thing. All right, not bad at all. Happy with that time. Hat number two, if you will recall, I said that I was going to do most of the body in stockinette instead of ribbing because as an English style knitter, ribbing is one by one ribbing is very slow and tedious for me to do. And so I was hoping that the stockinette would speed things up a little bit, and it did speed things up a little bit, but not that much. So hat number two came in at 3 hours and 20 minutes. And while that is technically a time reduction, for my purposes, it's not particularly that much of a time reduction. I suppose like if I wanted to like start a one-man sweatshop and just churn these things out at scale all day, every day, the extra 20 minutes for this one would pose a problem. But for my purposes of just like curiosity to know how quickly I can knit a hat, 20 minutes is nothing. And like I mentioned when I was discussing the second hat in particular, I am not crazy about how like scrunchy bunchy it looks up at the top with those rapid decreases, whereas on the ribbing hat those rapid decreases look a lot nicer, and honestly in my opinion that's worth an extra 20 minutes to get the top of that hat to look a little bit nicer at rest. So, while there wasn't a huge time difference between the first hat and the second hat, I'm glad that I did both. I'm glad that I saw that the time save was not as much as I thought. And that is going to kind of lead me now into the results, the things that not the results, the things that I learned from the results, the things that I learned from doing this knitting experiment. So let's go ahead and move on to talking about those now. So what did I learn from these experiments? What can we take away from this? And the first thing I learned, I already kind of hinted at, and that was I learned that ribbing is not nearly as slow compared to stockinette for me as I thought it was. So whenever I did that second hat, I fully expected eliminating so much of that ribbing and replacing it with stockinette would like fully cut my knitting time in half. And obviously that is not the case. I severely overestimated how much time switching to stockinette would save me. And I think there's a couple reasons for that. I think one reason is just purely structural from a knitting standpoint, and that is the fact that the row gauge for stockinette ended up being smaller than the row gauge for the ribbing. So basically, my ribbing stitches were considerably taller than my stockinette stitches, which means that once I got to the stockinette section, I was having to knit a lot more rows of stockinette than I would have had to knit for ribbing. And while the speed that I can do stockinette was saving me some time, I was eating into those time savings by having to knit more rows of stockinette than I would have ribbing. And so like I said earlier, going forward, like this is a great like little hat pattern to just like churn out gifts and stuff for. And so going forward, I would absolutely just stick with the ribbing version because it looks nicer. And for my purposes, that extra 20 minutes is not that big of a deal. That was just very shocking that the stockinette was so close in time to the time it took me to knit the ribbing as well. So that was the first thing I learned. And then the second thing I learned is sort of like just a more generalized version of the lesson I learned with the stockinette and the ribbing. And that is the lesson that the experience of knitting inside my head is not necessarily the reality of what's happening. Like both of those hats, I was super pleased with the time on both of them, even the longer one, because as I was knitting them, it fully did not feel like 3 hours and 40 minutes. It fully felt like it was taking me like 6 or 7 hours to knit those hats. So the experience of knitting the hats was a lot slower in my mind. It felt slower in my mind than it actually was in reality. And that really surprised me too, because it's not like I hate knitting. Like I clearly am a fan of knitting. So like the idea that it would like slow down, or it would make things it would make it seem like it takes longer than it actually does. That was a weird thought for me. Because in most of the time when I'm doing something that I enjoy, time speeds up. I look down and, a couple hours have passed and I'm surprised at where the time has gone. But for whatever reason, despite the fact that I love knitting, like the opposite is happening for me. And the knitting is feeling like it's taking a lot longer than it actually is, which I guess is a good problem to have, because now I know that I'm not just like, sitting in my chair knitting hours of my life away. I can tell myself now, oh, it's just in your head. Just keep pushing through. Just finish this section or whatever. Because even though it feels like you've been sitting here for 10 hours, you've only been here for 10 minutes. So it's not that big of a deal. So it's a good problem to have, I guess, because it's all in my head and I can convince myself of that. But like I said, I was very surprised because most of the time when I'm doing something I enjoy, time speeds up. But for whatever reason, like time was slowing down for me mentally when I was knitting, which was an unusual thing. And I'm glad that I did these tests, because I don't know that I would have ever like noticed that just on my own if I hadn't been like sitting down and really tracking and timing the amounts of time I was putting in on these projects. And as far as like what I'm gonna do with this information going forward, I think there are some things I could probably do to improve my knitting time in general, both for ribbing and for stockinette. I did notice that I do a lot of just like fidgeting with the stitches and just like a lot of extraneous hand movements that aren't super necessary. And I think if I really like buckled down and focused on eliminating some of those unnecessary movements, that could help improve my time. But really, like, I don't think at this point, I don't think there's any like secret magic trick that's gonna like, cut my knitting time in half or anything like that. And so I could make some modest improvements, but really, I want to use this information going forward more to just help better like inform my planning of knitting projects. Something like, this sort of knowledge is really going to come in handy in terms of like last minute gift knitting, which I would never do personally myself, but should the unfortunate scenario ever arise where I'm forced into a situation where I have no choice but to wait until the last minute to knit something as a gift, it's good to know that I can like whip one of these hats out in an afternoon. That's nice to know. And as far as doing more of these experiments, I think it would be nice. Now, granted, I could like go back and like count the rows in these hats and figure out how many stitches per minute I'm knitting or whatever based on the total number of stitches in the hat and how long it took me to knit it. But honestly, I probably will do that if I'm being honest, but I would like to try some more of these experiments with different kinds of knit objects. So if there's something else you would like to see me speed knit, by all means, like leave it in the comments. Right now, my thought is socks, because that is something that I knit a lot of, and it's something that I wouldn't have to like find a pattern for. I can just like, I've got a pattern in my head at this point. I can just whip them out without thinking. But if there's something else you would like to see me knit and tie myself, please definitely leave that down below in the comments, and I will give those a try if I can. So I think that's going to do it for today. Like, I am all knitted out. Like, I've knit so much in the last 2 days that I'm ready to give my hands a little break. But if you enjoyed the video, I'd really appreciate it if you could give it a like. And if you enjoy knitting content like this in general, I would encourage you to subscribe to the channel so that you never miss an upload from me. And I guess that is going to do it for me today, and I will see y'all in the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye. So